No, but are you muted?
Yeah. People on the Zoom, can you hear me? All right.
Yeah.
And people on the
Yes.
Zoom, give me like a audio check.
Yes. Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
All right, great. Again, for those on the Zoom who missed it, I'm Jay. I work for Okta. So I'm going to be talking about the future of identity. So for today's agenda, right? So we're going to talk about the market situation today in the identity space, not necessarily access management. And then we'll talk about some of the broad trends and innovations we're seeing. Again, a lot of these are my personal opinions. There are other things that I missed here. Happy to have like, sidebars and discussion, like, what you guys are hearing as well. And then we'll go over governance and authorization, a topic very close to my heart. And then, I'm going to talk about AI. No conversation is complete if we don't talk about it. How companies are using it. So, all right. How do I shift it back? All right. Oh, that's cool. Keep going. People can't see the content of presenting. So, you got it. Okay. All right. All right. Lastly, I'm going to leave some time for a Q&A. But again, don't wait till the end. If you have questions, if you have comments, happy to keep it a conversation here. And from time to time, I'll poll. Yeah, just with more pulse check for me more than anything. So please humor me when I do that. So during this presentation, I've used a lot of Okta branded logos and slides. It's mainly to talk about the trends that we're seeing. It's kind of like a snapshot of the market. There are other vendors doing this as well, who I'll talk about. Again, I don't have access to their branding or content, and I cannot talk about their capabilities in depth, hence the Okta logo. So just keep that in mind when you see like any Okta branded logos. So that's the safe harbor here. Just my legal, my marketing, spare me if I don't talk about this. But again, everything that I'm talking about is publicly available information. But I just have to do it. That's the T's and I's. All right. So let's talk about the current state of identity and trends, right? And to set the stage, I wanted to talk about how we have gotten here. And I've been at Okta for like 7 years. And prior to Okta, I used to work at a company where we had an on-prem Exchange, on-prem Jira. We used to use something called Outlook Messenger as the communication service. We used Workforce, I used Git as the repository. Right? And this was not like, I'm not old. This is 2014 to 2017 that I'm talking about. Right? So from that, when I shifted Okta, when I used to talk to customers, these were the kind of conversations we were having, even though cloud was well on the line. So the picture that we would paint when we spoke to execs, we were talking about, hey, this is how identity has gone, and this is where it's going to head towards. This logo is pretty old. I mean, the slide is pretty old. It's like a 7-year-old slide. So identity used to be like in stack. So you had your Active Directory, Oracle Access Manager, SAP, CSA SiteMinder. Everything was about syncing directory information to other applications. And over time, identity developed as this bridge between on-prem directories and all the cloud-based SaaS applications. As you had applications moving to Office 365, Workday, Salesforce. So that identity was that bridge between on-prem directories and cloud apps. And this was the picture that we used to paint about how identity would be that common fabric that would connect to all the applications, all your critical infrastructure, your privileged resources, your APIs. It would all be managed in this centralized, pane of glass. But again, looking back right now, this also is kind of ancient history. This is kind of table stakes for a lot of identity vendors. So it's kind of similar to like, I don't know what the right analogy is. When you look at a lot of old videos where people talk about in the 90s, we're talking about the internet and what it would be used for, it's kind of like cringy and hilarious. That's kind of what it feels like. So everything that we're talking about has already happened, right? So when we talk to customers, what do they focus on, right? So what customers mainly care about is reliability and scale. Everybody has a multi-cloud strategy. They want to make sure everything has failover, backups for all their critical infrastructure and SaaS. And identity itself has, expanded. I don't think in the last 2 years I've used the word single sign-on directories. It's kind of table stakes that for identity as a third reviewer, and there is even MFA, multi-factor authentication review. Right? A few years ago, that was a completely different thing. Now with everything, the way the security attacks are, MFA is table stakes. What instead customers are focused on is a lot of broad phishing resistant security measures. And a lot of these coupling of different identities. So you have the account identity, how that combines the device identity and session identities. And how you combine that into this one profile that's used to assert and how it's sent to a downstream application. And we have shifted from like point-in-time verification to continuous evaluation. Has everybody heard of continuous authentication? You guys, implement that? No? All right, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And again, from just-in-time access to like more of a dynamic access. And a lot of this is powered by low-code automation workflows. And this last thing here, right, that is the more scary part. We live in some crazy times. The number of security attacks just keep increasing every year. Whether it's phishing attacks, data breaches, everything that we see. And attackers are getting far more sophisticated in how they use these, attacks. They're going to use the most sophisticated technology to do the biggest exploit. And if that's not enough, the commonality here is that identity is critical security infrastructure, right? We have this explosion of AI. This slide is not meant to get political, but we got an in here, and AI is being used to generate a lot of imagery, voices, multimedia videos to cause disruptions, right? But if you look up like for each of these articles, a lot of those attacks are used against enterprises as well. How many of you guys are familiar with phishing? Starts with a B. Yeah. So one of my coworkers, he has his mother got a call from someone saying, hey, it's her nephew. I've been kidnapped in your ransom. And she was transferred away. It all stemmed from because he's a teenager, the nephew. He has something on Instagram. It's a publicly available read. People, use AI to train the video, spoof the caller ID, call him, they'll write it. Again, if you look at your CIO, CEO, whenever they give any sort of public interview, that's going to be used against like all of your employees. We have protected against phishing so far. How we can do against that is there. And there's also like how companies are leveraging generative AI. It's not to like attack any company or anything. Every company wants to use Gen AI to provide a better customer experience. They want to go to market with this. They want to take advantage of it. They want to get efficient. But there's a right way of doing it and a not the right way of doing it, which is what I'm going to talk about today as well. So this is, the identity maturity curve. I just call it the racetrack just for the presentation. So when we talk to customers, we are trying to meet them where they are. And different customers will be in different parts of this maturity curve. Yeah.
So the question, you mentioned about vision.
Yeah.
So how is for example, if you want somebody person entered CFO via video conference, losing $25 million, right?
Yeah.
So how can
So that was more of a example of how AI is being used in a lot of these attacks. A lot of like help desk verification. Anytime there's financial transactions, there's out-of-band MFA that we see for a lot of financial services. There's also like continuous evaluation that we'll talk about. But just around phishing itself, Okta doesn't have it. There are other products that will have to be there. So yeah, when we talk to customers, they're in like different stages of this journey, right? And again, for today's conversation, I'm not going to go over the previous labs. We are the presentation about the future of identity. So I'm going to focus on this, finish line, right? The converge and amplify. So, we want to, with all of the other signals that we have, we want to converge all of those signals and get the most out of them. So there are going to be like three things that we talk about today. Identity threat protection. Everybody has heard of identity threat detection and response. So it's kind of being forced into or being pulled into identity space because we're no longer focused on, point in time verification. It's all about continuous evaluation. We'll talk about how some of the vendors are doing it. Policy and privilege posture management. I don't think there's, abbreviation even exists. PPPM, PPSPM, whatever. But if you see it on Gartner, you heard here first. So
going forward, if someone asks you a question, please repeat it so that other folks understand.
absolutely. Yeah. So the question that was asked earlier was about how Okta protects against vishing. And really, there isn't a lot there. It's only about like out-of-band MFA and verification that we'll have to do. It's just something to show about how, AI attacks have gotten sophisticated. What's that? It's a feature request. Yeah. Roadmap. Well, let's table that. All right. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about is, how AI can be used. What are some of the Gen AI investments that are being done in identity and how they're being leveraged today. All right. So this is kind of like a zero trust architecture, and you will have seen like many different iterations of this. If you look at endpoint detection or you look at SDNs. So, companies will always have like all of these different security stack, right? So you'll have your CASB for cloud visibility. You have your device posture with your MDMs, EDRs. You have your networking perimeters, your Palo Altos, your Zscalers, and you have all of your SecOps automation and SIEMs. But again, when we talk about identity, it's all about an identity-centric pane of glass, or identity is that one common thing that ties everything together. Any sort of like remediation that you have to do starts with identity, no matter what security stack that you're using there. And again, identity is just one layer across all of these different security tools. So for customers to protect their SaaS applications or critical infrastructure, they need all of these different security tools, and identity is that one centralized control plane, where you can figure out like how this identity is asserted as they access all of those resources, right? And again, you have seen like a lot of these combinations, identity plus XDR plus network. This could be like Ping plus Tanium plus Palo Alto, Microsoft plus CrowdStrike plus Zscaler. Again, this slide is just used as an example of how, customers use the best in breed to figure out their zero trust solution. So for today's conversation, right, I said that I'm going to talk about three things: identity threat protection, privilege posture management, policy posture management, and the last one is, Gen AI investments in identity and access management. For those of you who don't know, like Okta, it's not just identity and access management. So we have this unified platform about all things identity. So we have the access management, identity governance, privileged access, and all of this is powered by our low-code, no-code automation directories. But I'm going to focus on mainly two things here, right? Risk detection and response, and posture enforcement and observability. All right. So just a quick show of hands. How many of you are familiar with session replay attacks or protecting yourself against that? So for those of you who don't know, like, historically, identity has been viewed as this digital front door where you have the strongest form of security. You want to check they're coming from the right IP, the right device. And then once they're verified, there's a session cookie or token that's generated, and the identity provider hands it off to another application. But once that is done, there's very little that the identity provider has control over. Once it's handed off to, I don't know, Salesforce or Workday or whatever it is, it's out of our control. That's a third-party application, we figure it out. So what attackers have been figuring out is, rather than focusing on the digital front door, they can compromise the device or compromise the browser, scrape for that session cookie or token, steal that, replay it on another device, and effectively bypass all your MFA, all your EDR, all your controls. Again, IT provider doesn't know about it. You've already admitted it. You take care of it. And once they're inside an application, they're able to move laterally and run a lot of experiments. So the answer to that is this shared signals pipeline. How many of you are familiar with shared signals framework? So the shared signals are CAPE. Does everybody heard of CAPE? Continuous access evaluation profile. So I'll try to give like a very brief. Again, a lot of this is like what we come across. I've tried to minimize a lot of the slides here. If I don't do a good job explaining, please ask for questions. I'm happy to explain it or happy to have a sidebar afterwards as well. So shared signal framework is developed by the OpenID Foundation. The same guys who gave us the OpenID Connect protocol, the OAuth2 spec for protecting APIs. So a continuous access evaluation profile and shared signals framework is a way to have a discrete packet of event data that has to be transmitted between two trusted systems. And it's both upstream and downstream. And the packets the protocol is in such a way that it's done in a performance efficient and secure and scalable manner so that it's not too chatty on the network. So rather than, having the identity provider just mint that session and scoping that session or token down to figure out like when it can be stolen, the shared signals framework allows for, say, your CrowdStrike, your Palo, or anything else to provide that signal to your identity provider or to any application so that you can take continuous action based on that, any of those signals. So, I have some links here, which I'll share as part of that. And again, if this needs for the Zoom, I can do this as well, put that in the Zoom as well. But from Okta, we have what we call as identity threat protection. A lot of other IAM vendors are getting this specific as well. CrowdStrike has its own thing too. So, like we're saying, rather than figuring out how to secure that session entity, so once the user's logged in, so you have your continuous evaluation of first-party signals coming from Okta's risk engine across where the user's logging in from, anonymous behavior, new detection, located or password reset. And then you have your XDRs, your MDMs, your CASBs sending a lot of signals into Okta's risk engine. And then based on that, you can take action on that. So once the user's logged in, so based on the shared signal pipeline, you could get saying, hey, malware was installed on the device or device got compromised. And then you can take action based on that in your identity provider, not necessarily Okta, right? Saying, hey, sign the user on all of the applications or invalidate the token. And it's not just one way, right? Once it has been sent to the application or something happens in the application, that can be sent back to the identity provider so that lateral movement is stopped as well. So, we have our low-code, no-code automation called workflows. Microsoft Entra has Power Automate. Ping has its own, DaVinci. So again, based on any such threat detection, you can take action based on that, saying, hey, deprovision access in all the applications, challenge the user for more MFA, or deprovision the user from their device, lock their device, clear all. So a lot of these session replay attacks, this is the answer there. So where identity threat detection response is kind of rolled into IAM. Yeah.
You didn't mention those malware. What if they're not using a malware?
Like they're not using a malware?
Yeah, they're not using a malware. They were able to steal that session and try from the machine, which is as clean as your
Yeah. So the question is like, what if the malware was not detected and they just stole the session cookie and replaced, replayed it on somewhere else, right? So that comes down to like your analytics engine. And in Okta, we have this what we call this risk engine, where any such abnormal behavior when a user signs in from a new location, those things would have to be tracked and say, hey, you know what, let's trigger a response based on that. And then within the shared signal, lock down the device or sign one of their applications. So yeah,
You can talk about IP based, something like that.
that's right, yeah. So just looking at the task, and authentication, if there's a new location, new device, something that's detected, take action based on that.
Sorry to ask, but what is your IP?
If they're using IP spoofing, then it comes down to like, the device profile, what kind of device that they're using. So whether it's a trusted device, whether it's enrolled in an MDM, so those are the kind of checks that we'll have to do. Again, this continuous evaluation for every session, everything is in real time. It's done rather than at once, because of the shared signal framework, it's a continuous authentication, continuous evaluation. Or we do it at time. All right, so there are some links here. Again, we'll send all of that links out, right? So the other thing is, identity security and posture management, right? So everybody's familiar with CSPM. This guy here. And there's ESPM, data security and posture management. So the thing about a lot of identity, providers are looking at is where is, when we look at configurations, when we look at privileges that a user has within not just the identity provider, or it could be across SaaS applications, it could be across infrastructure. And how do we take action based on that? How do we have a snapshot of that? So it's not something that is going to be specific to one identity provider, it could be across multiple identity providers that they're using. So this is the new thing that we call as identity security posture management. So to say like, hey, is there a snapshot to say like which user has overarching access in the identity provider? Do they have like super admin access or they don't have MFA? The service accounts that don't have MFA, or they have like overarching privileges or permissions. So this is like a new thing that we're seeing across a lot of customers. And again, it's that whole, it's forced into it because there's a lot of other vendors doing it. And there's a need for it to be done at the identity level here. All right. Any questions about the identity threat detection response before we go into the governance and authorization? About the AI portion, I have a whole segment at the end, which I'm sure everybody will have something to talk about.
Jay, go back on the previous
Yeah.
slide. So when you say identity security posture management, did you say of the access? Give us a snapshot of who has access to which application?
No, not who has access to what application, which users have overarching privilege or has excessive privileges. It's all about enforcing the least privilege principle.
Yeah, but is it based on an application or a system? When you say privileges, is it an identity itself doesn't have any privilege unless you tie that with a system or an application?
That's right. So for a user in AWS that says like, hey, they have like overarching access to EC2 read, write, delete. And again, it's less about that. It's more about the identity providers and SaaS applications. So in Salesforce, if we take into account, identity does great at like saying, okay, we have provisioned access for all of these users, these licenses, we can run access certification campaigns. But when it comes to all of these service accounts, there is no way to track MFA or what level of privilege they have or how often it is tracked. So that's what this identity security posture management is about.
Can I ask a question about service accounts?
Yeah.
So you have service accounts going all over the APIs and Kubernetes and all. So does it go and crawl? You can get the service account which has got an excessive privilege now.
No, it's not so much as a privileged access wall or anything, but if it is, again, identity security posture management is mainly done across applications and infrastructure, not so much the applications maybe. Eventually, maybe one day, but this is mainly for service accounts that are used in your end service accounts that are used in AWS client A and client secret combinations, and if they have overarching access, they haven't been rotated in a while. This is going to give that dashboard to say like, hey, here are all the problems. That's real time reporting and rotation that you.
Yeah, we have a problem actually with all the service accounts with excessive privileges. Like for example, if you run a PostgreSQL database, it's running with the Postgres is right.
Yeah.
And
So, yeah, so usually that comes in the realm of privileged access. So where you store them and how often you certify them, how often you rotate them. If it is like something like AWS or Salesforce or something else, that's where identity service provider, ISP can help. But again, it'll be a while before we get to overarching service account, posture.
Even like Kubernetes distribution, we have like service tokens which have done more than roles and customer lines.
Yeah, this would not be able to solve that, at least not today.
What's the functional difference between this and cloud infrastructure and timeline management for the cloud side and SSPM for the SaaS side?
Yeah, so again, this is just one of those trends that we're seeing where identity vendors are forced to provide this as part of that function. Historically, you've had like the Wiz, Lacework, which talk about CSPM, CIEM. So this is mainly from the identity perspective. So how we do it from the identity side, this is one of those trends that we're seeing. Now, how the market's going to shape out, I cannot predict that. This is just one of the trends that we're seeing.
So we have one question. Is it any kind of, ask a different type of question. Does it do any kind of tagging, privilege tagging?
No, not so much.
It is a customer's responsibility.
It is the responsible product. Yeah, and again, with both CrowdStrike, Okta, and like what Microsoft's planning as well, it's all about reporting. There's not a lot of remediation or real-time, action we take.
How frequently after it's been evaluate
Are you asking about the security posture management or the previous? The identity question, whether the real-time, so it's not so much polling. We're waiting for signals, whether it's first-party signals from Okta or third-party signals from, say, CrowdStrike, Zscaler, all of one time. There's less polling, we're waiting for signals to actually come in. And if it's first-party signals, Okta, like abnormal behavior detected, that's a signal that build it or distinct it and real.
Talk a little bit more about how you're discovering MFA bypasses.
So mainly, again, a lot of the way that Okta, Entra, Ping, everybody do it is based on the group access. Service accounts, users, they're all applied to a group, and the MFA policies are applied based on that group. So we are polling to all the users to figure out what the policy is attached to that. And based on that, we can say, hey, these are the set of users that have MFA on them, or these are the set of users that don't have no MFA at all, which presents a certain risk posture for the identity provider.
So that's more like an MFA policy enforcement gap
That's right.
than it is like an actual vulnerability in the MFA itself.
That's correct. Yeah. So yeah, it's less of vulnerability management, more of like, hey, this is a gap in security policy. Yeah.
What about attacker in the middle scenarios, like I think the stolen session token
Mhm.
was mentioned, but are you able to detect that kind of activity on an ongoing basis as far as like attacker in the middle access goes, like, hey, this session suddenly changed IP address or something
Yeah.
like that?
So that would be part of this, the shared signal framework, right? So these are two separate things. One is the shared signal framework. The other one is the ISPM. So in the shared signal framework, yes, whenever that session, has been replayed, there's a cookie that has been minted that the system is not aware of. You can take action based on that. This is just, think of it like a dashboard more than anything else. It's just talking about posture. And this is more of a, you can take action based on that remediation, and this is more on continuous evaluation. Any other questions? All right, so let's talk about governance and authorization, right? So this is going to have like a little bit of a hot take from my side. So my hot take is that governance and authorization are two sides of the same coin, all right? And again, this is purely talking about trends and not how historically authorization or governance has been done, right? So when you have your developers who are building your SaaS applications, they're trying to build authorization based on entitlements, licenses, subscription. and they're not adhering to any framework. They're just trying to make their application work and ship to market as early as possible. And on the other side, you have your governance practitioners who are trying to figure out how to consolidate all the permissions and entitlements in one place that can be applied across all applications. And each application does it different. Like Salesforce has its permission sets, its licenses. AWS has its AR and its huge JSON blob. Microsoft has its groups and roles. And each application does it in a different way. So I'm going to talk about like these two trends, one from an authorization perspective and one from a governance perspective, and where they'll converge together, right? So if we talk about application authorization, I can go into like all the different patterns that are there, but I've kind of whittled it down to like two things, right? And this is, again, a lot of it is my personal opinion. Again, happy to have any sort of conversations around here, right? This is one that I'm very passionate about. So you either have your X-based access control, which is your role-based access control, application-based access control, attribute-based access control. It's usually a user schema, and user has these attributes. Users are assigned to a certain group or role, and the group has certain metadata. There are permissions defined on APIs. The problem with this is when you try to scale this out, it's not very performant. So it's either you'll do a lot of database reads. We'll just take an example of like a school, right? Teachers, school, classes, principal, who has access to what data. So trying to scroll through all of those groups or reading through those entitlements, or you're passing like a JWT between two systems, which has like a lot of these attributes in there. Whether you define it on the user schema or you define it in groups or on the API, there's a lot of design considerations there. Or one of the newer things that we're looking at is entitlements that can be described by a relationship. And they're kind of deeply coupled to define the relationship between two objects. And this is found to be a more performant and scalable, which I'll talk about in a bit. So this is broadly called as the relationship-based access control. So again, just a quick pause, right? How many of you have heard of Reback? Is anybody familiar with Google's Zanzibar? So over the last 3 or 4 years, there have been a lot of different trends for authorization as to like how best to do this. And the Google Zanzibar framework is kind of emerged as kind of the winner, right? It was developed by Google for how they build Google Drive, YouTube, and all their Google products. Again, I'll try to whittle down to like, as simple as possible, right? So there are 3 main things. There's the authorization model that defines all the different objects. And then you have these tuples that define the relationship between the 2 objects. And once you have this, to be able to query what is the relationship between any 2 objects, what actions they can or cannot perform, that comes down to a query, which is a graph lookup, which is what makes us scalable, which is what makes us a lot more performant. And again, we have our own fine-grained authorization service. Other vendors, Ping and everybody else, they have their own fine-grained service. I think it's called Symphonic. And there are other players too, Warren and everything else. But the biggest thing here is that relationship-based access control, that's what it's based on. We said like it's inspired by Google Zanzibar. The scalability is what is the differentiator here. And again, the last test that we ran, it was 10 million transactions per second, around 100 billion tuples in sub 20 milliseconds. You figure out the relationship between it. Again, I have some links as well, which we can share too. Again, for a developer who's trying to build their latest application, this is the easier way to do it than trying to figure out how to store the data across databases, figuring out the relation between any databases, how to do common joins. And for existing, applications, if you have a high TCO of how the authorization is managed, migrating it to a tuple basis or a relationship basis that will provide a higher TCO. So this is all about like authorization. So there's the blog there, which we have which talks about like the evolution of fine-grained authorization, and it also talks about some of the other models that are being used there. All right, so I'm going to talk about governance here, but just quick pulse check. Like, does anybody want to talk about authorization? Again, I come from a developer background. That's one that I'm passionate about because I spent a lot of years in that world, and that is one that I'm very excited about. All right, so let's talk about governance, right? Identity governance has been around for a while. Historically, it has involved like a lot of custom coding. It's, again, if we go back to that hot take that I had, right, it's because we have all these complex authorization, governance has been complex because of that. How you figure out how to certify which user has what entitlements and what system, it comes down to like a lot of these custom coding, birthright access, least privilege access. How do we define that in policy? That becomes a lot harder. And it's usually pretty fragmented. And the problem there is, you have like different panes of glass for where this control is, asserted. So IGA is where all the access certifications and flow workflows are configured. And then you have a lot of custom code for a lot of these legacy applications where you have to figure out what is the business logic around which user gets access to what. And then for critical infrastructure, all those questions we're asking about service accounts for Kubernetes and everything else, that's historically been part of PAN. And then, again, if anything happens in your governance, say somebody fails certification, what is the action you take based on it? Do they stop signing in? You want them to be charged for MFA? Should they be deprovisioned? That is a whole other, disjoint system. And approval workflows, sometimes, people use ITSM, which is mixed in with all your other day-to-day service requests as well. So what has been the solution for a lot of the governance providers here? Again, I'm taking Okta as example, but again, Entra has its own Entra identity governance. Cyber has its own governance tool as well. So one, the place where you do security and compliance needs to be the same. They cannot be two disjoint systems. Historically, there's been a line drawn saying security is different, compliance is different. Where you do audits is completely separate, where you do MFA is completely separate. Security is for preventing breaches, compliance is for affecting which user has what access. But it really doesn't make sense to have the two systems. It has to be in a single place. If some risky behavior happened, I want to stop certification for them. Or if somebody failed certification, I need to be able to prevent access to those applications. And what is going to make a lot of this possible is the low-code, no-code automation. We cannot be spending developers to write a lot of this custom code, custom logic. What is the approval? What are the approvers not there? Who's the other person to take action? And how these entitlements are stored, CSV file, databases. So we need a centralized pane where all of this is defined. And again, meeting users where they are. You can't have people going into IT systems, filling out requests, somebody approves it. It has to be in a place where they can get it right. Their Slack, their Teams, their WebEx. Hey, I need access to this. It's off on approval of the application owner, the InfoSec. They review it and say, yes, we need it. They get access right. The other thing is, again, how many of you, track Gartner Magic Quadrants for a lot of your security vendors? You take a picture of it, but one of the things that has been interesting is the Gartner Magic Quadrant for governance. It stopped in 2020. They said that the market is too mature. And if you look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant for identity and access management, they rarely talk about SSO. They don't talk about MFA. What they are talking about is governance, privileged access, because the future of identity is that there's going to be a SaaS converged IAM platform where you're going to have governance on the same platform, privileged access on the same platform, and you have this local no-code orchestration that's going to be doing. And again, a lot of the other IAM vendors are going this direction as well. Happy to hear conversations around what other IAM vendors are doing as well. So between Entra, Ping, CyberArk, Okta, this is the direction that everybody's heading. Microsoft Entra has its, their Entra SSO, Entra Identity Governance, Privileged Identity, and Bing has its own set of things. So this is kind of like where the industry is heading towards. All right. Any questions before? How are we doing on time? We good? All right. All right. I'm going to go over the last topic, which should be a fairly quick one, but hopefully interesting. Okay. All right. So let's talk about like some of the generative AI investments in the identity and access management space, right? So this is like a pitch that a lot of people used to give. Every company is a technology company. You have Strawberry Farm, you have any sort of grocery shop or not. It's kind of changing into that, right? Every company needs to have something about it. They have to have for the go-to-market, for the branding, for the customer experience, whatever they want to provide, they're going to use AI there, right? What's that? Mainly for branding, right? Yeah, driven, yeah. But when we go back to that other slide that I was talking about, how we're in an election year and some of the bad ways of using AI. So every enterprise that's going to use generative AI investments as part of their offering or for improving things on their end, they have to be thinking about what's your AI strategy, what markets you're playing with, and really what is the advantage you're getting out of it. It's not just marketing, right? It's really reducing costs, making things better. And there's the other thing with Gartner. By 2025, 34% of all organizations are going to use generative AI as part of their identity fabric functions. And again, I'm a little bit skeptical, but it almost feels like we're on this cutting edge here. That's the time that we're living in. 15 years ago, when cloud became that new thing, everybody started moving to cloud. 20 years ago, the dot-com boom. This is going to be that AI boom. AI is going to be there for a lot of companies, whether we like it or not. It's going to be, pushed down our throats. And again, we also spoke about how attackers are going to be using AI for a lot of their security attacks. And, that's the bad way of doing it. So we have to figure out, or the security has to evolve to protect against this. But there's also like a good way of using AI. So one of the key things with AI is it really has to be purpose-driven on purposeful data to take like real outcomes, right? So this is what we see for a lot of the identity vendors who have their own AI, including our own Okta AI. So the way we train the data is from our own risk signals, our own users, our behaviors that we see within our systems, rather than training on, your Reddit posts or your Facebook commentary or, any other material out there. Again, when you don't control the data with which you train your AI, you get like a lot of these other, bad outcomes there. How many of you are familiar with GitHub Copilot? Yeah. So one of the things around GitHub Copilot is when you ask for suggestions, so saying things like, yeah, you can hardcode your secret code, store it in plain text. AWS and AI, it had the same thing. And again, I know you have your own AI streams as well, so I hope I'm not sounding like a broken record here. Microsoft Copilot, great tool, but how you set the price, because it's going to traverse through your entire network, all the documents, to say like, hey, if I am looking for data, whether the document has been shared with me or not, Copilot is going to read that and do it. So you have to be very purposeful, driven about how you anonymize the data, how you feed it to the fabric. And there should be like real outcomes that you take out of that. Actions in terms of developer actions, security actions, and policy and opt actions. So I'll briefly talk about this, right? This is, again, just trends that we are seeing, right? How do we configure security policies with AI, right? Again, how do you feel like our identity expert practitioners? Or at least like work with that practitioners. Okay. So the biggest part of it is like setting up your MFA policies. So there's endless conditional access policy, King 1 or access after MFA. And again, given the nature of security attacks, the number of policies you have to configure are a lot more. And what is the best way to do it? Are we doing it the right way? So that's where AI is being used to say like, yeah, every policy that you, and again, the screenshots are not that great here. For every policy, this is the number of attacks that it's blocking. This is the number of phishing attacks that it's blocking. This is how effective your policies are. And again, if you want to construct a new policy, that's where AI can be like, hey, these are the parameters that you need to incorporate. IP, geolocation, device, XDR signal, construct the policy for these group of users, risky users, non-risky users, which populations are more at risk, not at risk. That's where, AI will make things a lot simpler. And the use of AI in governance, right? So when you're doing your access certifications, again, people who do a lot of these access certifications are certified 100 people across many different applications, depending on how many direct reports are there. What if you could see whether this user has been involved in risky behavior before? This user has been compromised several times, or this user was compromised last week. If that could come up in your access certifications, that is what, and again, this also underlines the need for access management and governance to be on the same page rather than two separate, platforms. And also like predictive recommendations, 90% of the certifications are like a repeat of the previous campaign. The user is the same who they are, they have the birthright access, you don't need to recertify them. What if 90% of that AI says, you know what, these are safe, they can take care of that. And again, like just-in-time access for entitlements, as people change, you don't want to be doing manual entitlement change. Users don't need to be waiting for this. These are places where AI can help as well. And the last one, this is one of my favorite one, mainly because like whenever somebody goes through a breach, sit on there, a Splunk, trying to figure out the right string. Again, how many of you have spent this time in a second? So if I could tell the AI, like, give me all the reports for this user from this location was handled from 2 different locations. If AI could build a dynamic string for me, again, it's not out of the world. Like Copilot with Sentinel does this. You could go and construct that, and it will build a perfect build for you. So any dashboard, any reporting that you need, these are things that AI will make a lot easier. Again, AI can be bad. AI could be gimmicky, but if we use AI right, if we train it on the right data, it'll make things a lot simpler, a lot secure. You can supercharge your SOC about, hey, here are all the alerts that you need. Here are all the suspicious traffic that is detected. A lot of this with AI, and again, this is real screenshots from Okta, but again, different identity vendors will have their own AI offering, and this is how it can be, used to make life simpler. And extensibility, and again, this is more on the developer side because, a huge part of my daily job is talking to developers about how they build customer identity. So the code that they use to extend the platform. So when they are minting a JWT or a SAML, how to get it from the platform, take decisions based on that, or figure out optimization. What kind of code that they have to build? Okay, AI-based code generators are out there. How secure they are, how often they're scanned, whose purview it is. That is an important thing. And again, if we train the AI with the right set of data so that you're minimizing it to your own developer documentation rather than looking at Stack Overflow or whatever other Google search results are out there. All right, so that's the whole thing with generative AI, right? So at the end of the day, it needs to be able to make organizations be more proactive about security, using that Gen AI for log analyzer, governance analyzer, helping developers build apps faster. And again, the real value add for customers is they're able to get that frictionless user experience. And a lot of it would be built by this low code, no code automation. Okay. So that concludes like the future of identity. I might have missed a lot of trends, but these are the top of mind things for me. Again, as allocated like the last 10 minutes for Q&A. This is my LinkedIn profile. Happy to connect, happy to answer any more questions, conversations. There's also an open one, you can say, that was completely wrong, so I'm happy to.
Jay, would you please go back to the authorization section? You said you have developers right now, right?
Yeah.
So let's go to that slide. Trying to understand what after authorization.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called fine grained authorization service, right? So we have a customer identity solution. So when developers are building a B2B or B2C portal, they don't want to build identity functions, like how authentication is done, how MFA is done, how user management is done. So that's usually stored on Okta's customer identity cloud. And developers will communicate it with some level of SDKs, or they'll consume that. Now, historically, once authentication is done, the identity providers will be like, yeah, you handle it. Here's the JWT, you figure out how to access your backend APIs. This fine-grained authorization service is completely separate from our authentication service. It could be used with pretty much any IDP. Rather than defining, hey, this user has access on another set of data, which has a certain set of permissions, read, write, delete, or whatever on something else, it's in the form of tuples. So you define a tuple, the relationship, and whenever you run a query, it's kind of like a graph lookup. So you want to find out, hey, between teacher and student, what is the relationship? It will return that exact query. So rather than traversing through the entire database, it's a simple graph lookup. It's just traversing through a linked list instead.
So let me give you a scenario. In
Yeah.
enterprise setting, usually there are hundreds of applications.
That's right.
Right? Some of the applications are homegrown applications, some are run commercial cards,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So does this authorization service?
No.
Okay.
If you're building a new application, this is a lot simpler way to do it. For existing application, it's going to be a lift and shift to this model, depending on what the TCO is, how much debt you have, tech debt you have within your existing authorization scheme. And is it worth it? That's a whole other conversation. But long term, this is where everybody's going to move towards as you look at scale, performance, and everything else.
So let's talk about a new application that I'm building.
Yeah.
Right? So using this service, what kind of changes I need to make, or a developer need to make in the application to take advantage of this centralized authorization service?
Yeah. So you have your data in your database. You have your API layer that takes action on the database. But where is the policy to check whether all of these relationships are enforced? You have the option of either building it within your application, building yet another relational database that says like, hey, here are the relations. You can build it in your IDP to say like, these are the groups, user schemas, this is the relation. Or you use a service like this FGA, where you define your tuples. It's simple like a set of strings, your JSON library. So rather than building the entire authorization service and policy, they put it on this,
I get it.
and they'll just check with that, hey, does this work? And depending on that, they'll do the right
So I
thing.
cannot use this with cards.
You cannot use this with cards, yeah. I wish it was that simple, but again, I've tried to focus on the future, yeah. Yeah.
Quick question. Didn't talk about access control.
Yeah.
So is that something that Okta offers,
The governance analyzer?
so let's say folks are certified,
Yeah, yeah.
this is like, hey, this is okay certified.
Yeah.
You guys also offer that?
Yeah, so our governance offering is very new. I'd say like 2022 is when it went live. So the AI governance operation is on our, it's gonna be soon. Like I was saying, in 2 months, we should be able to release it. So when the users are, admins are certifying users, a risk score will appear next to each other. And you can also set policies to auto certify a lot of users based on the risk.
It's not there.
It's not there.
And that will also help with the access request.
That's correct, yeah.
I have a question on, you can pull one of the slide of the signals.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one question like, so what I understand from that is the signals are given by these different third-party providers, different identity providers.
Yeah.
So how mature it is today, like in terms of, so what I understand is there's a standard, right, for giving signals.
Yeah.
Some of these vendors are already implementing their standard and sending those signals, and how is it kind of, almost all of them are doing it here, or the vendors which are kind of catching up.
Yeah, the vendors are still catching. So, and again, this signal is two-way, so it's not just them sending it to us, we can send it back to them too. So they support that, there is a little bit of custom coding involved. Again, when you have that local orchestration, that's what makes it a lot simpler. To say like, hey, take action based on that or send the signal back to the third-party system. So for now, it's, for Okta at least, we only have integrations with the ones that are listed here. The Apple Business Manager, Material Security, Paul, Zscaler, Superior, CrossRite, so.
Okay, and I was asking you, because you put like offer risk engine, it could be anything, it could be my own custom engine, which is looking for those signals, right, to do my intentions.
It depends on the IoT provider. So I don't know what Microsoft Infra has here. They're working on something there. Things, different options. I'm not sure if it's Ping one, whether they have it or not, but those are the IoT providers that. So really for the IoT provider, here I'm only talking about what options.
I pretty much answered it. All I knew was that standard is a general standard. It's not an Okta API.
It's not an API. Yeah, and have a links for the share signal framework, CAEP, all of that is developed by the Open ID Connect Foundation. I'll work with you to share the links.
Yeah.
To all of it.
Yeah, I have a question on AI.
Yeah.
AI part of it. You said there's a natural language, interface.
No.
Where I saw that there's a, natural language process. Anyway, the question was, is it possible as of now, the business analyst without technical background can actually write a prompt or a query to whatever the AI engine is to find who has access to what and what kind of privileges that person has, or any kind of English like queries which are typically generated by IT guys to create reports?
Not with Okta. That is something that we have on our roadmap, but with Microsoft Copilot, that's something that you can do. You can say, hey, I need to know which user has access to what data. And that's something through a natural language, you can type it out in English and it'll be able to generate that. But again, there's a lot of privacy settings also. You have to make sure that they get the right data and not, overarching data there.
Okay, if there are no questions, thanks a lot, Jay.
Thank you.